B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Eirovin Daf Kuf Hey. We're going to start 11 lines from the top of Daf Kuf Daled Omid Beis, the very last Mishnah in the Masechta. Says the Mishnah, Sheretz hanimtza b'mikdosh. A sheretz is a type of a crawling creature that there's 8 such creatures in the Torah that after they die, they have a very severe type of tumah on them. They are an av hatumah. Somebody, if a sheretz like this is found on Shabbos Kodesh in the Beis HaMikdash, and a sheretz is clearly not allowed to be in the Beis HaMikdash, no tumah is allowed to be in the Beis HaMikdash. The sheretz itself obviously didn't ask us whether it was allowed to come in, but having a dead sheretz there puts the kohenim at risk. If a kohen were to, by mistake, touch such a sheretz, then the kohen will become tomei, and then he's not allowed to be in the Beis HaMikdash. And it's a disrespect for the Beis HaMikdash to have any tumah in its boundaries. So what do we do if on Shabbos you find a sheretz, a dead sheretz in the Beis HaMikdash? So says the Mishnah, this is the first opinion, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroika in the Mishnah, Kohen moitzioi behemyonoi. Now we're not worried about removing it as in muktzah, because there was no muktzah in the Beis HaMikdash, ein shvus b'mikdash. The issa of muktzah is only a rabbinical one. However, if the Kohen were to take it with his hands and remove it, he would be making himself tomei. He's not allowed to do that. So what should he do? He will use one of the garments that the Kohen would wear was his belt, and he could use that belt. The belt itself was a utensil, it wasn't direct contact with the Kohen. The Kohen would touch the sheretz, would remove the sheretz with his belt, even though his belt will then become tomei. We know that, but in order not to delay removing this sheretz whilst looking for a tool that would not become tomei, for example, a wooden tongs, which are called a pshutei kle'etz, they do not have a receptacle, they will not become tomei. So if they had such a wooden tongs easily and readily available, they would use that, and then they would not be making this belt tomei. But since they did not want to delay removing the sheretz, the Kohen would use this belt to remove the sheretz, and even though the kohen is touching the belt, since the sheretz is an av hatumah, the belt itself will become a rishain l'tumah, and rishain l'tumah cannot make a person tomei, and therefore the kohen stays tahir and the sheretz gets removed. The kohen removes the sheretz with his belt in order not to delay removing the tumah. Rabbi Yehuda argues with Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroika and says, no, we prefer not to make any kelim tomei in the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore b'tzvat shel eitz, we look for tongs, wooden tongs that do not have a receptacle, and we will remove the sheretz with these tongs, and that way nothing will become tomei, shelei l'rabbi says atoma, in order to avoid making toher clothes tomei in the Beis HaMikdash. That's the first part of the Mishnah, a machleikas Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroika and Rabbi Yehuda as to how to remove the sheretz, and the machleikas is our main concern sheloi lishhois, that the sheretz shouldn't stay in there, or is our main concern sheloi l'rabbi says atoma, that more things should not become tomei? The second part of the Mishnah is discussing another issue. Meheichon moitziin oisoi. From where does one remove the sheretz? We know that the Beis HaMikdash itself had a number of different places. The further and the closer it was towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holier it was. Right inside you had the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Well, that's not a discussion because there's no sheretz in there and there was nobody to go in there to see a sheretz. That's not a discussion. But just beyond the Kodesh Kadoshim, there was the Heichal. Before it, that was the entranceway to the Heichal, called the Ulam. Just before that, that was the space between the Mizbeach and the Ulam, which was part of the Azara, but a very holy part of the Azara. And then there was the rest of the Azara. The question is, when the Chachamim said that you're allowed to remove this sheretz on Shabbos, and that's wavering the Issa of Muktzah, and possibly going into other issues, as we said, making the clothes tomei was a challenge. The question is, did the Chachamim say that you should do this on Shabbos, even if the sheretz was found in any place in the Beis HaMikdash, or just in the more holier places, relatively, of the Beis HaMikdash? So that's going to be a machleikas here. So the first opinion is Reb Shimon ben Nanas. He says that moitziin oisei min ha'heichal, u'min ha'ulam, u'mi bein ha'ulam lemizbeach. All the 3 places we mentioned, the Heichal, the ulam, and bein ulam lamizbeach, those three places are so close to the Kodesh Kadoshim, so close to the Shechina, so to speak, that one has to remove the sheretz. Rabbi Akiva argued and said even more than that. Kol mokim shechayovin al zadoinoi koros val shigagosei chatos. Any place in the Beis Hamikdash where if a person were to go in there when he's tomei, he would, if he does it intentionally, he'll be chayev koros. If he does it unintentionally, he's chayev chatos. If you find the sheretz there, you have to remove it on Shabbos, and this means even the whole of the Azara. Not just the part of the Azara that was bein ulam lamizbeach, but even the whole Azara, one has to take away the sheretz. V'shar kol hamakomis. Any other places, according to Reb Shimon ben Nanas, that means the rest of the Azara. According to Rabbi Akiva, that means the chambers beyond the Azara. Where in those places, going in there as a tomei is not punishable by chorus. Koifin alov psachter. For there, we would not allow the kohen to remove the sheretz on Shabbos. They would just put on top of the sheretz, they'll turn over this utensil called a psachter on top of it, and that way nobody will become tomei from it and leave it there till after Shabbos. Continues the Mishnah. This is the third part of the Mishnah, and a rather cryptic part that the Gemara is going to have to explain what this means. Reb Shimon Omer, Mokim shehitiru locha chachomim, the place that the chachomim were lenient and they allowed you to do what they allowed you to do, mishelecha nosnu lecha. What they gave you, that means the leniency they gave you was not really a leniency, they just allowed you to do what was rightfully yours to do. Shelo hitiru locha elo mishum shvus, and this is another statement that says the chachomim only allowed something to be done if it was a shvus, if it was an issa derabanan, not if it's in biblical issa. And we're not going to try and explain it here, we're going to see in the Gemara what this means. Says the Gemara, Omar of Tovi bar Kisna Omar Shmuel. This is an opinion of Shmuel, and the Gemara is going to discuss whether anybody or whether it's agreed upon this opinion. Hamachnis tomei sheretz lamikdash chayev. It's severely also to bring into the Beis Hamikdash any a utensil that became tomei. A tomei utensil is not allowed to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash. Sheretz atzmoi potur. However, to bring a sheretz itself into the Beis Hamikdash, this person's not going to be chayev. He's going to be potur. Maitam. What should be the reason? Why should that be true? That to bring in a utensil that's tomei into the Beis Hamikdash is chayev, but to bring in a sheretz itself is not chayev. Omar Kro, this is learned from the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, Mizochor ad nekeva, from man to woman, Teshalechu el michutz lamachane teshalchum, they should be sent out of the Beis Hamikdash, v'lo yitamu es machne mashani shoichen b'soicham, in order that they should not desecrate, they should not make tomei the camp where the Shechina is resting, which is the camp of the Beis Hamikdash. So the pasuk says, "Mizochor v'ad nekeva teshalechu," from man to woman should be sent out. Mi sheyesh lo yitara b'mikveh. What's unique about a man and a woman that if they become tomei, they can go into the mikveh and become toher. Yotzor sheretz she'ein lo yitara. Which means that the only things which is severely also to bring into the Beis Hamikdash and has to remove the Beis Hamikdash, is only those things that are similar to a man or a woman, to a human being, that can go into a mikveh and become toher, which includes utensils. A sheretz itself, you can't put a sheretz in the mikveh. Toval v'sheretz biyoda, you cannot put a sheretz in the mikveh and expect it to become toher. And therefore the sheretz is not included in the bracket of Mizochor ad nekeva teshalechu, they should leave the holy camp of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore bringing it in is also not going to be chayev. The Gemara is going to try and bring proof to what Shmuel said from a brisa. It says in the brisa, Mizochor ad nekeva teshalechu. What do we learn out from the fact that the Torah said that for man to woman have to leave, if they're tomei, have to leave the Beis Hamikdash? Pratlik licheres. This excludes earthenware kelim. That earthenware kelim do not need to leave the Beis Hamikdash even if they're tomei. Divi Rabbi Yossi Aglili. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. That's the end of the brisa. The Gemara is going to explain. Maitam. Why should that be true? That earthenware kelim do not have to be removed from the Beis Hamikdash, lav mishum de lesle tara b'mikvah, because we know that earthenware kelim never become toher by being submerged in a mikvah. They have to be smashed in order to become toher, and therefore they are not similar to zochar ad nekeva. They do not need to leave the Beis Hamikdash, and that is a proof to what Shmuel said, that a sheretz itself, which is also not something that can be purified in a mikvah, also there's no issa for it to be in the Beis Hamikdash, and there's no chiyuv for it to leave the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara wants to bring the proof to Rav Shmuel from Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Says the Gemara, loy. No, there's no proof. It could be that what the reasoning of what Rabbi Yossi Aglili said was that what do we compare mizochar ad nekeva? Not somebody who can go to mikvah to the exclusion of sheretz or klicheres. No. Mishenase av hatuma, that only something that can become, it doesn't have to be, but can be an av hatuma, which is a very high level of tuma, only such a type of person or such a type of object is required to leave the Beis Hamikdash, and bringing it into the Beis Hamikdash is chayiv. And that includes a sheretz. A sheretz is an av hatuma, but it does not include the klicheres. It could be that the reason Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that klicheres is not included in mizochar ad nekeva t'shalechu is because a klicheres can never become an av hatuma. Yotzo klicheres she'enu nase av hatuma. There's only two examples when a klicheres, when any kli could become an av hatuma, and both of them and the klicheres is excluded from both of them. And Rashi here elaborates which kelim could become an av, and why the klicheres cannot. So we don't have proof from Rabbi Yossi Aglili to Shmuel. Continues the Gemara. Lema ketanoi. Maybe the first part of our Mishnah, where there's a machlekas tanoim between Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka and Rabbi Yehuda, maybe they're actually arguing exactly in this discussion of whether a sheretz whether it's also to bring a sheretz into the Beis Hamikdash, and whether there's a chiyuv to remove the sheretz at the first possible moment from the Beis Hamikdash. Because what did we see in the Mishnah? Sheretz shenimtzu b'mikdash koin moitzioi behem yonoi shloi lishois es hatoma divi Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka says, get the sheretz out as quick as possible. Every extra moment the sheretz is in the Beis Hamikdash is an issue. And even if you have to get rid of it by making the belt tomei, that so be it. Get rid of it straight away. Rabbi Yehuda says you have time, don't panic, look for wooden tongs, don't make anything else tomei, and even if it takes a little bit of extra time, you have the time to wait. My love, says the Gemara, can we not assume that b'haka miflagi, that's what they're arguing about? Demanda omar shloi lishois, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, who says you have to get the sheretz out at the first opportunity. Kosova, he holds hamachnis sheretz lemikdash chayev. He says that bringing a sheretz into the Beis Hamikdash is actually chayev, and he obviously learns, or possibly learns, that Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who excludes klei cheretz, is only because it cannot become an av hatuma. But the sheretz is an av hatuma, is not excluded from mizochar ad nekeva t'shalechu, and therefore the sheretz being in the Beis Hamikdash is seriously osa. Somebody who brings it in is chayev. Get it out the first possible moment. Uman do'omash le'lerabos. And Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you've got time and we prefer that you do not make kelim tomei, Kosova, he holds a machnis sheretz lemikdash potur, like Shmuel said, that bringing in a sheretz, since a sheretz cannot be purified, cannot be nithar toher with a mikvah like zochar or nekeva, therefore Shmuel, and that's what Shmuel says, that there's no isser for it to be in the Beis Hamikdash, bringing it into the Beis Hamikdash is not chayev, and therefore time is not of essence. You have to get rid of it because you don't chas v'shalom a kohen to become tomei. But the extra few moments it takes to find the wooden tongs that's not an issue. Says the Gemara loy. Don't try and explain the machleikus tanoim that this is what they're arguing about. To kule al mechayev, it could be they both hold chayev. Shmuel wouldn't agree with this because Shmuel says that somebody who brings a sheretz in his potter. So Tosfos discusses that. But the Gemara says it could be that both opinions in the Mishnah actually say that one is chayav for bringing in a sheretz into the Beis Hamikdash, and every second the sheretz stays there is an aveira, we have to get rid of it the first second. So what are they arguing about? Rabbi Yehuda says you can wait till you find the wooden tongs. And this is, they're just arguing with basic logic. Marasova shihu itoma odif, or marasova afushe tuma odif. There's an advantage and disadvantage to both opinions. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Bereika, you're saving time, but you're making a kli tomei. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not making a kli tomei, but you're losing time. The sheretz is hanging around in the Beis Hamikdash. You're putting other kohanim at risk. So that was just a machlekes. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shihu Yitama Odif, it's better that you wait the extra few moments before you get it out, rather than making something else Tomei in the Beis Hamikdash. Or Marasova, Rabbi Yochanan ben Bereika holds, Afushe Tuma Odif, we prefer for an extra kli to become Tomei as long as we can get the sheretz out of the Beis Hamikdash as quickly as possible. Continues the Gemara. Elo kahani tanoi. Well, remember, there's a second stage, a second section in our Mishnah with another machlekes tanoim, and it could be that what they're arguing is whether bringing a sheretz into the Beis Hamikdash or not is chayev. Ditnan. We learned in the second stage of the Mishnah. We saw that there was a discussion in the Mishnah that from what part of the Beis Hamikdash are you allowed to remove a sheretz on Shabbos? We saw that according to Shimon ben Nanas, you're only allowed to remove the sheretz from the more holy places, which is the Heichal, the Ulam, and Bein Ulam LaMizbeach, but the rest of the Azara not. Rabbi Akiva said, anywhere in the Azara you have to remove the sheretz on Shabbos. So the Gemara is saying, my love, can we not assume, this is what they're arguing about. The man to Omar, according to Shimon ben Nanas, who says, me'azara loi, that you do not have to remove, you're not allowed to remove the sheretz on Shabbos if it's in the rest of the Azara. Kosova, he holds a machnis sheretz lemikdash potter. He says that there was never a chiyuv or an issa to bring a sheretz into the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore, if you find it in the Azara, turn over this kli on top of it, don't remove it on Shabbos. It's only the much holier places and the places much closer to the Shekhinah, so to speak. For there we say, no, it's not fair to leave the sheretz there, remove it. But from the rest of the Azara, you can leave it there. Uman da Omar, according to Rabbi Akiva, Mikula Azara, who says you have to remove the sheretz even if you find it the rest of the Azara, Kosovar, he holds chayiv. He says that there's a severe issa for the sheretz to be in the Beis Hamikdash, anywhere in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore you have to remove it entirely. Continues the Gemara, Omar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan seems to be challenging what we just said now, and says that it could be that both opinions, both Reb Shimon ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva, they both hold that to bring a sheretz into the Beis Hamikdash, any part of the Beis Hamikdash, is chayev, is severely also, and nonetheless, according to Shimon ben Nanas, you only have to remove the sheretz once it's there. Then, once it's already there, you only have to remove it from those places that are much more holy, that are much closer to the Kodesh Kadoshim, to the Shekhinah, and to the rest of the Azara you don't have to. And Rabbi Akiva argues with that as well. And that machlekes seems to be a different argument, and they're not arguing as to whether one's allowed to bring a sheretz into the Beis Hamikdash, whether one is chayav for bringing a sheretz into the Beis Hamikdash, etc. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Shneim mikra echad darshu. It could be that they both learned, that means both opinions, Reb Shimon ben Nanas and Rabbi Akiva, both learned their opinions from a pasuk, not regarding whether one's allowed to bring a sheretz into the Beis Hamikdash, but regarding actually removing a sheretz from the Beis Hamikdash. And the pasuk we're about to bring is actually not talking about sheretz, it's talking about avodah zarah. It's a pasuk in Divrei Hayomim when they were removing the avodah zarahs, which they themselves have some element of tumah to them, removing them from the Beis Hamikdash. The pasuk goes as follows: Vayovoyu hakohanim lifnimo Beis Hashem letahir vayoytziu es kol hatumah asher motzu beheichal Hashem lachatzar Beis Hashem. They would bring all the avodah zarahs from inside, from the ulam, from the heichal, from the ulam, from the place bein ulam lamizbeach. They would bring it lachatzar Beis Hashem, to the more outer places of the Beis Hamikdash, and from there the Levim would receive it from the Kohanim. Lahoitzi lenachal kidron chutza, and they would take it out towards the nachal kidron. So, Mar Sovar, Midishtani ba'azora belevim. Since the pasuk says that the Kohanim would remove the avodah zaros only till the azara. Once the avodah zaros were in the azara, they needed many Kohanim, or many people, so to speak. They needed many people to remove these avodah zaros, take them to Nachal Kidron. So the Kohanim that were inside brought the avodah zaros till the azara, and they would have to then give it over to other people who would take them out. Would they give it to other Kohanim, or would they say, no, from this point on, we're not giving it to other Kohanim, as the Kohanim were engaged in removing the avodah zaros from the more holy places up to the azara. In the azara, it was given to the Leviim. So, Marasovar, Reb Shimon ben Anas holds, Midei ishtani ba'azara b'Leviim. Since we see that at that point the Kohanim would give the avodah zaros not to other Kohanim, just to other Leviim, we see that Tumah ba'azara leka. Once the avodah zaros or any other Tumah is in the azara, then it's not so severe, it's not so terrible if it stays there, or it's less terrible if it stays there than if it stays in the more inner parts of the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore they would only give it to the Leviim and not to other Kohanim. Or Marasovar. However, Rabbi Akiva held, no. Ad heicha de le'efshe b'Leviim mafke Kohanim. Hashta de efshe b'Leviim su lo metame Kohanim. It's not because it was less serious, less severe. Rabbi Akiva says that the Leviim couldn't go beyond this place. Only Kohanim were allowed to go there. So since only Kohanim could go there, Kohanim would bring it out. From this point on, Leviim could be there as well. Give it to the Leviim and don't make Kohanim tomei. But either way, it was a discussion. What do we learn from the fact that the avodah zaros from the azara and beyond were given from the Kohanim to the Leviim, then were not given to other Kohanim? Do we see from there that removing a tumah from the outer part of the azara is that little bit less serious than that removing it from the more inner places? And that would explain the machlekes of Shimon ben Anas and Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah. But not that anybody holds that actually bringing in a sheret into the Beis HaMikdash is not chayiv. Continues the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanon, Hakoil nichnosin b'heichal livnois l'sakein u'lehoitzias atuma. Anybody can go into the heichal, which is one of the more inner chambers, in order to build there, to fix there, or to take out a tumah. Mitzvah b'Kohanim, however, is preferable. It's a mitzvah for a Kohen to go in. Imein sham Kohanim nichnosim Leviim. If a Kohen can't go in, a Levi should go in. Imein sham Leviim nichnosim Yisraelim. If a Levi cannot go in, a Yisrael should go in. Ve'idi tahirin in Tamein loy. But either way, pure people, the tahirim should go in, and Tameim should not go into the heichal. Continues the Gemara. Omer Rav Huna, Rav Kahana Messiah Kahani. Rav Kahana used to be the one who would find leniencies to help the Kohanim. Some suggest Rav Kahana himself was a Kohen, others say that it's alluded to in his name. His name was Kahana, which was similar to the word Kohen. Either way, he used to, so to speak, help the Kohanim find leniencies in the halacha. The Tanya of Kahana, Mitoich Shenemer, since it says in the Pasuk, Ach el ha-paroiches lo yovoy El ha-mizbeach lo yigash, ki mum boy, v'lo yichali les mikdoshai, ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. So it says in the Pasuk, Ach el ha-paroiches lo yovoy, that a Baal Mum should not go into the Heichal. Yochi lo yiyu kohanim, Baali mumin nechnosim ben ulam la-mizbeach, la'asis rikuei pachim. So are you going to suggest that some Kohanim that were Bali Mumim, that had some blemishes and had some ailments which avoided them, didn't allow them to do the Avodah, they were not allowed to go between the Ulam and the Mizbeach, which was the place the place in the Azara closest to the Heichal, just before the Ulam, which was the entranceway into the Heichal. We would think that from this pasuk they're not even allowed to go there, from there and in la'asos rikuei pachim, in order to make these metal plates, the gold plates that they would put into the Kodesh Kedoshim onto the walls. Talmud leimar ach cholok. Since it says ach el ha-paroiches lo yovoy, what it means is that ach is sometimes, it's an expression that's used that in most cases a Baal Mum should not go in, but sometimes he can. So what it means is that mitzvah b'tmimim, it's a mitzvah for people who are not bali mum to go in. Ein sham tmimim nechnosim bali mumin. However, if need be, and there's no tmimim, no people without a mum, even those with a mum can go in. Mitzvah b'tohirim, there's a mitzvah for people who are not tomei to go in. Ein sham tohirim, if there's no tohirim, then nechnosim tmeim, even tomei people can go in order to fix and amend what needs to be mended, even deep inside. But in either way, they all agree that kohanim in Israelim loy. It doesn't matter whether they're bali mum, whether they are tmeim. Better that a kohen bal mum or a kohen tomei should go in, and not a Yisrael, even if the Yisrael is not tomei and not a bal mum. The Gemara says that we saw that a toher kohen should go in rather than a tomei kohen. A kohen who's not a bal mum should go in rather than a kohen who is a bal mum. What happens if you have to choose between a kohen bal mum and a kohen tomei? Tomei u bal mum, eze mehem nichnas. Which kohen should be chosen to go in? Rab Chia bar Ashi Omar Rav, tomei nichnas. In the name of Rav, they said that tomei should go in. Why? Because there are some types of avodas in the Beis Hamikdash that we disregard the tumah. If there's a tumah in the whole tzibur, or in most of the kohanim, there's different times where we say, even though you're tomei, you can do the avodah. A bal mum, we don't find such a thing, and therefore it's easier to waver of the tumah and allow a tomei kohen to go in to do what has to be done, rather than a bal mum. Rebbe Loza argues with Rav and says, no, bal mum nichnas, rather bal mum should go in, because a bal mum is allowed to eat kochim, he's just not allowed to do the avodah. However, somebody who is tomei is not allowed to eat kochim. So you see that it's easier to waver kedusha, or it's easier to be associated to kedusha as a bal mum than as a tumah, and therefore bal mum should go in rather than somebody who's tomei. Continues the Gemara, and now the Gemara is going to the last stage of the Mishnah, which was rather cryptic, and the Gemara is going to explain it. Reb Shimon oimer v'chulu. So what are the words of Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon said, Mokim shehitiru locha chachomim mishalecha nosnu lecha. That was one statement. And the second statement, shelo hitiru locha elo mishum shvus. And we don't really know what this means. What the Gemara is going to tell us now is that, and Tosfos wonders why it's here, why this part of the Mishnah is here. But either way, we've seen many times, but in two places we find Reb Shimon. In one place he's being more stringent, in another place he's being more lenient. We saw Reb Shimon on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, and there on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis we saw that Reb Shimon was lenient. If somebody went outside the tchum, we know that every city has a tchum. 2,000 amis outside the tchum, there would be markers there. The surveyors would put markers and say, this is the end of the tchum. A person who goes beyond the tchum, that's it. He's stuck there. That's his. Well, if he was there when Shabbos came in, when he was one amma outside the tchum and Shabbos came in, that's his center of residence. He's only allowed to walk 2,000 ammis from that point, and he cannot, so to speak, join the city with its tchum and go freely in the whole city. That was the discussion there. Reb Shimon there was lenient and said no. He says even if you're outside the tchum, it's as if you're in the tchum. Even though you've gone beyond those markers that say that this is the end of 2,000 amas, you can still assume that you're within the tchum of the city, and therefore when Shabbos came in, you were within the tchum, you are part of the city, you can go anywhere in the city, and 2,000 amas beyond any side. So that was a leniency we found with Reb Shimon. Then there was another Reb Shimon on Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis, where there was a discussion there when one of the strings of the harp in the Beis Hamikdash of the Leviim would get torn. Then we saw in the Brisa that the Tanakhama say you're allowed to tie a knot and fix it. Reb Shimon says no, you're only allowed to make a bow, you're not allowed to tie a knot. There we find that Reb Shimon was more stringent. And we're trying to make some order here. Is Reb Shimon taking the more stringent line or the more lenient line? And in these two lines in our Mishnah, Reb Shimon actually explains himself. Let's see the Gemara. Reb Shimon oimer v'chulu. Reb Shimon heichakoi, the first part of Reb Shimon's statement, where Reb Shimon said, Mokim shetiu locha chachomim mishelcha nosnu locha. Where's he going on? Hosam koi. It's going on the Mishnah on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis Ditnan. Misha hichshech chutz l'tchum. If when Shabbos came in, a person was outside the tchum, afilu amo achas, just one amo outside the tchum, the Tanakama say, lo yikonis, he's not allowed to come into the tchum, which means he's allowed to go 2,000 amas from where he is, but he's not part of the city and its tchum. Reb Shimon says, no, afilu chomesh esre ama yikonis. He says, even if you're 15 amas beyond the markers that the surveyors put down, you're allowed to assume that you were in the city when Shabbos came in. Because the markers of the surveyors, they were set 15 amas before the end of 2,000 amas, because of mistakes. Either the mistakes of the surveyors, or the mistake of people like this person who made a mistake, or somebody who by mistake on Shabbos left the 2,000 amma tchum, and once you're out, you cannot come back in. Then, in order to save these people who make these mistakes, then within 15 ammas, we gave a margin and say, don't go beyond this point. But if you went beyond this point, you're still within the 2,000 amma tchum. So that's what Reb Shimon said. So Reb Shimon said, the Ka'oma Tanakama lo yikonis, that the Tanakama who said that if somebody was outside the tchum, even one amma cannot come in, va'omar le Reb Shimon yikonis, and Reb Shimon said you can come in. Why? Because he said, and that's what it says in our Mishnah. Reb Shimon explained that that these 15 ammas that were just beyond the tchum, they're actually yours. It's not that I, Reb Shimon, am being lenient. It's not a kula that I found in Hilchos Shabbos. These 15 ammas are really within 2,000 ammas. They belong to you. They're part of the tchum of the city. And therefore, when I said that if somebody's an amma outside the city, it's as if he's in the city, it wasn't a major leniency I was giving. I was just giving you what was rightfully yours. And now the Gemara continues with the final statement of Reb Shimon, that Reb Shimon said that shelo yitziu lecha elo mishum shvus. Says the Gemara, Heiche koi, what's this going on? Hosam koi, it's going on the Mishnah we learned on Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis. The Tanakama said koishra, that you can even make a knot on this snapped thread, this snapped string of the harp. Reb Shimon said to the Tanakama, Oinvo, you're only allowed to make a bow, you're not allowed to make a knot. Why? A bow can never be a type of an act which is going to be chayiv chatos on Shabbos. Even if you make it permanently, then you're still not chayiv chatos because of the type of knot it is, the type of bow it is. Kshira, however, making a knot, the osi l'dei chiyuv chatos, making a kesher itself could be a chiyuv chatos, and even if you do it in a temporary fashion, it could be made in a permanent fashion, and therefore it could come to chatos. Lo yishor le Rabbanon. In that case, the Rabbanon said, even in the Beis HaMikdash, you're not allowed to do this, because that's what Reb Shimon says in our Mishnah. Shelo yitziru lecha elo mishum shvus. The only types of melachos or isurim that were allowed, that were wavered in the Beis HaMikdash, are those that cannot become isurim doiraisa. But those things that are or could become isurim doiraisa, there, even in the Beis HaMikdash, we do not let you transgress them. And that's how Reb Shimon explained himself. Even though on Daf Nun Beis I was more lenient, it wasn't a real leniency. I gave you the extra 50 numbers because in truth they are still within the tchum. And the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Beis, where I was stringent, is because ein shvus b'mikdash is only when it's a shvus, only when it's an issa d'Rabbanon, then we waver it in the Beis HaMikdash. But if it's a issa d'oraisa, or could become an issa d'oraisa, then you're not allowed to transgress it even in the Beis HaMikdash. Hadron aloch hamoitzi tefillin. B'siyata deshmai, we finished Perek hamoitzi tefillin. In Mirtz Hashem, we're going to do Chazor on Perek hamoitzi tefillin, or Slikalom Maseches Eirovin. And with this, we've finished learning Maseches Eirovin. And B'siyata deshmai, we'll come back to Maseches Eirovin. And in the next shir, we're going to start Maseches Psochim B'siyata deshmai.